Welcome to PowerUp podcast, the podcast that seeks to empower and dismantle, giving us the power and confidence to question, deconstruct, rebuild, and expand in life. I'm your host, Amma Rouge, voiceover and multidisciplinary artist, well-being advocate, food and book geek with over 14 years of movement-centered experience.
I am your host, Mesma, artist, choreographer, yogi and coach with a passion for alchemy, creativity, transformation and workplace wellness.
We recognise that we can't dismantle and empower or be empowered without first learning ourselves, diving deeper to unlearn the harmful, restrictive and unprogressive. It's an ongoing practice and journey for us all, which is why we created this podcast.
Our show features guests doing the work to enlighten, deconstruct and power up in their own magical ways.
We're going to be having conversations around the power of healing, transformation, well-being and creativity, and how they feed our personal and collective evolution, how they help us power up.
Nadia Gilani, pronouns she, her, is a yoga teacher, journalist and author of the Yoga Manifesto, published earlier in 2022. She first discovered yoga after her mum took her to a class in the 1990s and she really didn't want to go, but has been practicing yoga ever since. Nadia has extensive experience of working with people with different bodies and from all walks of life and is deeply committed to making yoga inclusive. Whoop, whoop. Her approach to teaching is contemporary and explorative while maintaining a deep respect for the ancient practice.
When I see the youth and I see them kind of questioning all this stuff and kind of pushing against, I really I have an affinity to it, because I think even though I'm much older, I feel, I've always had this kind of like punk ethos. And, some people call it rebellious. I prefer punk because I just think it really... it's political, for me, and I feel very like I don't know why it's like this. We could put it down to any number of reasons. It could be because I'm an only child. It could be because, I'm rebelling against. I don't like authority. I like smashing things up. I don't like being told what to do, and I kind of found that with the book. And also, I think but there's a mature part of me that tries to look at things in a kind of, it's not kind to smash stuff up. So, and also sometimes that's not the most effective way, is it? And people stop listening when you're shouting at them.
Yeah.
So it's about being kind of, I think, creative about how you do it. But generally I do have, there's nothing that gives me more joy than just like if I see something that's just so sort of like, particularly within wellness culture, if I see something that's just like fluffy and insincere and kind of scented candles and all things that I like, right? I'm dissing the things that I actually when it's all this kind of stuff, the first thing I want to do is just like turn it over, smash it up and like just kind of smoke a fag and drink a Diet Coke.
Yeah, but I do think there's something about this idea of like presenting one side of ourselves in the wellness industry versus like sometimes maybe we like to drink a Diet Coke or smoke a cigarette or whatever the thing is that makes us whole, and that this presentation of like perfection can just sometimes needs to be smashed up, and especially when the perfection is not is sometimes dangerous even, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think that that whole kind of disingenuousness of it can be really dangerous and can close the space as well to a lot of people, and make people feel like if you don't fit this cookie cutter idea, you're not welcome in this space, or you can't have that in your life. And effectively, it's a lie. So
it is a lie. I mean, I was that person that, I was actually talking to somebody the other day about this. I've slowly started to feel a bit more comfortable talking about some of these things because, in my book, I had a very messy life. I was anorexic, I had bulimia, I have had relapses. I've had times with bulimia where I've been free of it. I've had relapses. I had a drinking I've done it. I was making myself sick. Like it was messy and turbulent. And then I was kind of moving around in this yoga circle. I'm talking sort of in my 20s, and I'm moving around in this yoga circle and slowly waking up to this idea that if I was still practicing yoga, but I felt like I shouldn't be because everybody else around me was probably not drink. I mean, I had this story in my head. I was probably wrong, but I had this story in my head, and I was, smoking roll-ups, and I was binge drinking and going to practice, and it was a secret. And like you said, I mean, it's dangerous and damaging. Secrets are dangerous and damaging, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, so I had this Jekyll and Hyde thing going on, where I'm living this two lives, and inability to get in touch with how I felt, really, obviously, or to digest how I felt, which is why I couldn't or eat or keep anything in when I did eat. And I suppose I'm making it sound really awful, but it was. And I think I wrote about this in my book, these things, and people contact me, and it is really heartwarming, because I was a bit like, oh my God, why did I say all these things in the book? Because I find it particularly hard to talk about the food, because drinking is almost like an easier one. And sobriety is talked about a lot more these days, like, because mental illness or mental health is talked about. Mental illness is a separate thing. I just don't think we've kind of got there yet, because we talk about mental health, don't we? Like, we need to kind of go to the mental health gym and self-care. But we don't really talk about illnesses, and like what I have experienced are illnesses, really, and I don't think there's enough understanding, because I still don't really fully understand it myself, the stuff around the food, because it's so complex and you can't remove it like you can remove the booze,
Yeah.
So it's a really tricky one. And then also, feeling pressure to be like, well, now you're working in the wellness space, you've got to kind of be, but kind of not perfect, but kind of like have sorted it all out. And I suppose what I tried to do with my story in the book, because it is a memoir essentially, is to kind of be as truthful as I can be, because being truthful is part of my recovery, really, and honest is recovery.
And I actually think that's what the yoga community need more of, is honesty and truth.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's it's unusual though, and I think, like, when I first started sort of talking about some of these things, nobody was really listening. And then in 2020, I mean, again, I didn't relapse then, but I was really teetering on the edge, and I really started thinking of drinking for the first time, and I was kind of like really not coping with the first lockdown that we had.
Yeah.
It's strange to say that now, because we had so many lockdowns in the end, and we adapted to a different way of life, kicking and screaming. We adapted to this new way of life. But actually, at the first time, it was really hard for me, and I started to. And by that point, actually, years later, I because I first started posting about some of the problems I saw in wellness a few years earlier, and then by the time of 2020, I had a literary agent, and I didn't have a book deal yet, but I had a book proposal. I knew what I wanted to do, and then we had COVID, and then I was pent up, and I just started writing of stuff on Instagram. I mean, I knew that it wasn't the platform for me, because like no interest before, which is where the book came from. It was quite clear that I needed a longer form. Instagram is so quick, isn't it? But it just, it just sort of took off. I started writing these. I don't know what really happened to me, because I did stuff I'd never done before. Like, I was putting my face on Instagram for the first time. I'd hidden away for that long. I started doing videos, and then it was just the timing. I think people were really interested. I couldn't believe it, and I suddenly thought, this is, I thought I was on my own, and then suddenly the truth was being spoken. But it did make me think, it's interesting you're saying that about truth, because I just think it's so funny. So many people are getting in touch with me now and saying, oh, they love what I've done or I'm doing, which is really humbling, because I literally didn't plan any of this. I just kind of started to speak my truth. Hesitantly, I should add, because, initially, I mean, I still get people, I think, who are attracted to things I say, and then there's people who are massively repelled by me. It's we have an in between. There's people who are really into it, and other people who are just not into it, and then other people, I suppose, who attack me.
And I think, kind of coming back to what you were speaking to, of you kind of, you speaking your truth on these platforms, that there is an element of that, of your changing lives by speaking your truth, and that's incredible work. That, of course, comes with great responsibility, but that, you by doing that, the people that hear and are like, those are the words that I maybe have been feeling internally and may not have been even aware of. And yeah, that's, your book is such a gift.
Oh, that's really kind of you to say. I think it's probably the greatest compliment anyone could ever give a writer, or certainly to me. And it started happening, I think, before the book came out, actually, a few times where I would, because all this started happening during the pandemic, and I went through various personal upheavals during that time. I had a big breakup and I had to move house a few times, and I was trying to write this first draft, and things would leak out onto Instagram. I would write things on Instagram and started getting a bit more emotional, which I'd never done before. And then, and people would, and actually, interestingly enough, some bits of writing, I wove them into the actual final copy of the book, because it just captured some really extreme emotional states I was in, which kind of offered some people hope on Instagram, for example. And then I expanded them and built on them, because people had said to me, thank you for finding the words for how I'm feeling. And I couldn't believe how it moved me, because I just thought, I didn't know that I could do that, or that, because I hadn't intended to do that. I'd intended to try and I'm really obsessed, perhaps is probably the right word. It's probably not even too strong, with just trying to drill into the human experience and like writing about how life feels at its most kind of visceral, like, I'm not it right all the time, but there were a few pieces in the book where they're just standalone pieces in the book where they break away from the main narrative, and I just write about hope, or losing hope, not being able to find it, what do and then finding it, and then really and because they're all true stories, one of them's when I did this really dramatic, I went on a run, and I'm not even a runner, and I had this really dramatic experience, and I came home and I wrote about it, and it went in the book. And
I'm so intrigued by that story.
Oh, really? Have you read that story?
I can't wait to get there.
Yeah.
But it was this piece of writing anyway, and I was really in this I was listening to a piece of music when I was running, and I came home and I thought, I have to write about this thing that happened to me, this kind of breakthrough that happened. And I came home and I put the piece of music on, and I sat down to try to write it, and I couldn't write it. So I put the music on, and it's 8 minutes long. So I just kept it on repeat for about 90 minutes while I wrote this piece of writing.
Wow.
And then I was exhausted. Like, writing is...
Yeah, it's like moving out your feelings, or... it's such a... It really gets to the core, doesn't it, of the feeling and the emotion.
Yeah, I think it's really funny, because I was a journalist for so long where I was writing other people's stories, because I love stories. I love getting to the hearts of stories, and also writing stories of people who you don't really get to hear from, or people who think their voices don't matter. Especially, that's my passion, really. That's really important. That's what I'm here for. Spiritual,
love that.
Getting to spirit.
So important.
Yeah, and I just think I often saw myself as a journalist who was like the vehicle for people to tell their stories. But then alongside that, some of my probably most kind of pivotal journalism years, I was drinking quite a lot, or I was binging, and I was throwing up, and I was like, doing all these messy, damaging things to myself. And then for me to be... So I was avoiding all these feelings that I've just now told you in dramatic fashion about writing about. And it's really painful. Like, you're kind of pulling... I actually mentioned this in my book as well, in the thank yous at the back. But, Lady Gaga once said, and I really related to this, where she said that writing... She's quite an intense personality, isn't she? To intense personalities. I think, because I'm now, I really relate to it now. Like, she's quite an intense personality. She talks about how songwriting is like performing open heart surgery, or having it on you. And I believe the same to be true of writing. Like, I had that experience, not the whole way through. It wasn't as epic and dramatic as that. I wouldn't have made it to the end probably if it had been for every bit of it, but certainly the deep digging, emotional, messy kind of parts were. But then, you know what? It's just kind of... I really thought I was taking a risk by sharing a lot of that, but actually I have had some really wonderful messages from people saying that, they felt moved to go and ask for help, having read some of my stories.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And would you say, Nadia, this is why you're so committed to making yoga as inclusive as possible? Is it because of your journey with it? Is it because of the way people reach out to you with how what you have shared impacts them and moves them and makes them make different choices?
I think it's probably, partly my story and partly my sort of, socialist leaning politics. Is probably the fact that I just think it's unjust, that yoga's become this elitist, expensive, exclusive product, when in fact it's a practice that should be available for anyone who wants it. There should be an egalitarian approach, be an equal thing, but it's sort of locked away through pricing and through this unwelcome thing, because people often talk about feeling intimidated about going to gyms, for example, and that's a shame, and some of us get over it and we go. But then I find it really annoying with yoga, because I suppose going to the gym is a physical thing, and yoga is packaged as this kind of fluffy live your best life thing, when actually, when you think about it, it's about digging a lot deeper. There is a whole spiritual to it. Like all these practices are, they're about looking at yourself, like therapy. I mean, like I talked about spending most of my life avoiding pain. I didn't realize that's what I was doing. But it's when you start engaging in practices like therapy, I suppose, or like other spiritual things like Buddhism as well, mindfulness has become popular. And where has it come from? It's come from Buddhism. But, an industry that's become, an app and something you do in your lunch break. And I think it's brilliant that yoga's gone mainstream. I think it's brilliant that mindfulness is helping more people. But the thing is that, I have an amalgam of practices now, and I think that, I've taken practices and everything's blended together, and it's hard for me to prize them apart. So I have elements of my Muslim thing, I have my Pakistani culture, I have Buddhism in there, specifically in the Zen tradition, yoga philosophy. I don't follow any single one, but I've been privileged and had these things kind of come into my life, but I don't do any one of them kind of perfectly. And I think that's the thing, though. You see, I don't think it matters. Whereas for years I thought I wasn't doing yoga properly, because I felt like I was on the outside, and kind of, like an outlier, or like, because it's kind of this thing, this kind of shiny, all those things that I've just said, it's kind of like elitist is the only way I can say it, because, I've taught yoga to refugees, and I'm really passionate about taking yoga to women, vulnerable women especially, but I'd like to meet more groups and be able to kind of share practices, because I was actually talking to a campaigner a couple of months ago who was talking about her time at Greenham Conman back in the day, and she was arrested quite a few times and in a cell. And I said to her, how did you get through a night in the cell? And she said to me, she's got a really strong Tai Chi practice and a really strong meditation practice, and that's what got her through. And that really inspired me, because I thought, oh my God, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to bring these practices to. I mean, I already kind of had this idea that that's what I wanted, but then I was thinking about her and thinking about other women and thinking about women. I mean, I was in an abusive relationship, quite a few years ago, when I was probably at the height of my bulimia and drinking. And I think about women who are in those types of relationships, and how do they cope? How do they get through? Do they have practices? Would they maybe help them just get through a night if they had access to, and it doesn't have to be, they don't need to learn handstands and crazy stuff the rest of us are doing, but comfort. And I just thought that's something that I feel quite passionate about me personally doing. But and I think that's part of the inclusivity as well. It's kind of really unjust. I think it's a social justice thing.
I wanted to ask Nadia as well about kind of appropriation within the yoga kind of community, and like how you balance kind of preserving its roots and then people appropriating yoga and that kind of aspect to the wellness scene or community?
I think it's probably a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, I think it's a really simple answer though that I suppose I'll give. I mean, having written this book, I think what it boils down to is doing everything with integrity and respect. There's in anything I say ever that white people can't practice yoga. That's like a Sun headline that is a misreading of what I've said. I'm going to say that white people can't teach it or that white people can't practice it. I think, Marlon James, the Jamaican novelist, once actually, I think, says this better than I ever could. And he said once, he was talking about many things to do with race and appropriation. And he said that, I'm just trying to remember, he said that the worst thing about appropriation isn't necessarily the appropriation itself. I'm paraphrasing here. It's kind of taking the thing and then acting like you came up with it yourself. So it's kind of the whole selling yoga to the Indians thing, the whole trying to sell snow to the Eskimos idea. Do you know, it's kind of like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And I think
trying to paint into something that's not actually yours and then sell it back.
It's not even just that, to be honest. Actually, things that sometimes irritate me are, I mean, this is really old now and it just makes me laugh, but at the time it caused me a lot of anxiety. I met a woman, a yoga teacher, and when I was working at a yoga studio, who was kind of like a hippy dippy type, and excuse me for sounding judgmental, but she was pleasant otherwise. A bit annoying because she wasn't really in the real world, and like I said, I'm very preoccupied with probably because of my politics, I'm just preoccupied with the world and like the world we live in and why there's all these inequalities and stuff bothers me. There's probably a lesson in there for me why she irritated me, but I find it quite hard when people have checked out. She said to me, I remember we were talking about a class that I just taught, and I talked about how I was really passionate about teaching people squatting because it's a real. I made a joke about how people don't squat in this country, and in where I come from, it's you do it from an early age. And she made a joke about how she thought she had Indian genes because she liked squatting. Now that really irritated me at the time. I just sat there completely angry and annoyed and not able to say anything because I was working at this yoga studio in a public place. But I mean, for days afterwards, I just kept that to myself. I just didn't really know whether I was allowed to be annoyed, all this kind of weird stuff. And then I spoke to some friends about it, and they were like, they were laughing in my face. They were just like, yeah, that's really weird. Like, what was she?
Yeah.
Do you think it's weird?
Yeah. Yes. It's cringy and it's offensive. It's like, because it's like that kind of, when someone makes like it's very throwaway, and it's very like, oh, the fact that, I can squat and I squat all the time, that basically makes me Indian. And it's just this it's such a reductive, ignorant comment. Actually, it's like you're reducing a whole nation of people and a whole culture to this like one aspect, and you think it's kind of light and throwaway. And on top of it, you're practicing yoga.
Yeah, and I think I was annoyed because I think most people think I'm Indian when they meet me, and I talk about it in the book a lot, and I talk about it I tell people all the time that my parents are Pakistani and I'm not Indian, although it was all India once upon a time. But the fact is that she thought I was Indian because people always do, and I found it weird that she said it to my face, because I just thought, you're saying this to somebody who thinks Indian. Like, why would you say that? It's just really weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumption in there as well, right?
Yeah, and I think that kind of, I mean, I don't know if it's a funny, weird example, but I think this appropriation thing, I think it's it comes back to respect and integrity. So I think, practice with humility, with respect, with integrity, and then also not, like something you just said, Amma, about kind of like these things are, you need to think about your words and you need to think about your actions. This is the practice. So I think the people who most inspire me, and it is quite rare these days, in particularly I would say in the yoga world, it's what I know best, but I think people who think that they're, that they become yoga teachers or whatever, and they're kind of like doing the practice, they're teaching the practice and blah de blah. But the thing is, it's how are we living the practice? I mean, I'm not getting it right. But I guess because I have this amalgam, it isn't all to do with yoga, but I have this amalgam of traditions and practices to draw from. And I really do. And I have also people in my life who are trying to do the same thing. And we talk about, Zen, or we talk about, like teachings of Zen, or we talk about, just I'm questioning things myself all the time. It's kind of like, be honest with me to be sharing my friend's Netflix password, or is it kind of, do you know what I mean? Like as simple as that.
Yeah, Ella and I have been talking about this in this series and off the podcast as well, haven't we, Belle?
Yeah,
a lot, questioning
that kind of
things.
doing the work of yoga throughout our lives.
Yeah, and kind of not stealing. Like there's all these tenets of philosophy in yoga, and I talk about them a lot. But they talk about non-greed and non-stealing is another one of them, and non-violence. I've talked about this before, but it's like all these things. It's not about passive. It's not kind of passively non-violence. Not swearing is not enough. I'm interested in what you're doing to promote peace in the world. I'm interested. What are you, like these active resistance? You talked about resistance earlier. There's so many examples in history of like non-violence that was active, like the civil rights movement in America, like the civil disobedience movement in South Asia, in India, against the British Empire. And these people were not kind of quietly, they were making waves in their communities. They're in history now. And I think like, yeah, with non-greed, it's not about me just not taking people's stuff, although I do think about that, because I think, well, should I be sharing this password? Should I not pay my own way? But then also there's kind of like being generous. So like, you with your podcast, like, giving people this platforming is really generous of you, and being generous. Like if we're responsible for paying people, we need to pay people fairly. People, like I said earlier, I try not to quote people without making sure I know who it is, because I'm trying to do, and I'm not saying getting it right, but because I make mistakes all the bloody time.
But doing the best we can. Yeah. And I think something about being active with our platforms as well, like these platforms have great responsibility, that to actually speak to the things that are not okay in the world, rather than just be kind of benefiting from a place where, a place of privilege, essentially, that we can use these places and these positions to create change instead.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's kind of how I'm trying to do it, because I'm trying to be, humble about all of this. And also I've been a bit at odds with this because I didn't mean to, but somehow I've sort of become, quite vocal about all this yoga stuff. And then people, I think, have sometimes like thought that I'm here and I'm going to tell people what to do. And even in the book, it ends with a chapter with lots of ideas and suggestions.
So excited to read it.
Thank you. But I was just going to say that I'm not even telling people, like in the end, I'm not even telling you what to do, because I didn't want to do that. I just want to get people thinking, because I think that's the thing is, I've kind of made this bed for myself, like in the sense that I've said all this, these are all the things that are wrong, and like these are things that need to happen, and I was shouting about all this stuff. And then when I came to write the book, it was kind of like, well, I need to kind of tidy this up a little bit and think in a more kind of, cohesive way. And I didn't want to write an angry book. I wanted to write a hopeful book. And so I kept, also I didn't want to tell people what to do. So it is a case of sparking ideas. And also, how am I going to know everything? Not everything that I suggest in the book is going to work for everyone. And also, in a way, I've appropriated yoga too. We're all, to a degree, if we want to be kind of, sort of, we're all, to be truthful, like we're all kind of appropriating it to a degree. We've all taken it on, those of us who practice. But then there's almost like nothing wrong with that, like Marlon James says. It's almost, how do we do it? How are we doing it? And respectful. Like there's certain,
with honor and respect.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain aspects of the yoga practice that aren't really for me. I don't, there's certain aspects that I'm not into, but I'm not going to then repackage it, distort it into something else that it isn't. That bit out of it. Like it's, I think yoga's been morphed into, it's become almost a pastiche of itself. It's become parodied and slogans and puns and namaste all day. And
if people would like to connect to you in terms of the book, because we know that you're doing a kind of a book tour.
Yeah.
Is that right? How can they do that?
I think the best thing is to go to my website. So It's nadiagilani.co.uk, and I mean, I'd love people to go and have a look and see what I'm doing. I've just kind of set this up myself, so I'm kind of doing a series of events, and sometimes it includes a yoga class, and it's like talking about the book, and then meeting people who are interested in reading the book or who might have read it already, who want to just. It's kind of got a DIY vibe. That's kind of what I'm going for, and I get quite lonely in London where I live, so I'm kind of. This is my attempt at sort of creating community and.
Beautiful. Can we ask where you're going? Are you going all over the UK? Do you go to Leeds? Do you go to Scotland? Do you go to Manchester? Thinking about places where I can maybe connect. Bournemouth?
If there's anybody listening who's in any of those places, I would love to come. So yes to all of those. I'm coming to. So I'm doing one in Brixton in London. I'm doing Reading, Dalston in East London, Brighton, and Margate. Also, and Bath actually before the end of the year.
Okay, good.
So Leeds is actually on the list. I'm talking to somebody in Leeds.
Yes. I might be able to connect you to some people in Leeds too. That's another conversation.
Yeah, that would be wonderful, because basically that's how it happened. It was so organic and brilliant. I just put a call out because I was just thinking, I've written this book and people are reading it and they're sending me messages, and I was just kind of like, I want to meet some of these people. The whole rip it up and start again punk thing is part of this. It's kind of like nobody else is going to do this for me. And when I looked into my heart and I thought about what I wanted, because I was feeling a little bit lonely after the book came out and like getting these lovely messages, but then I was just like, well, I need to come out and meet these people. I need community, I need connections, and also there's hope, isn't there, in these little incubators where you can just kind of like meet people. And when sometimes I come away having a really inspiring conversation with someone, it just sort of buoys me up for the next kind of bit of my life.
Yes.
And also you get connections and you sort of I don't know, there's like, I think magic can happen when you come together, and also people power. I just really believe in the fact that we don't have to wait for anybody else, and we can. So that's what I did anyway. I put this call out on my Instagram and I just said, I'd love to do a series of events. Would anybody like me to? And I was really scared because I thought, oh my gosh, is anyone there? But actually loads of people wanted to start in autumn, so I'm thrilled and can't wait. And but yeah, really keen to, and also just to mention as well, actually really keen to work with interdisciplinary. I love working with doing things that haven't been done before. So like I did a project with an arts and social justice organisation in the summer, and I got to be a journalist again. I met some amazing women I interviewed, and I worked with a sound designer, engineer. And it was just so nice talking to women who had incredible lives, stories that would disappear, but we made these sound pieces, and that's got nothing to do with yoga, but it doesn't matter, because it's all stories, and it's collective and community, and that's what I'm really about. So yeah, I want to do more of that hopefully in future.
So if you do want to work with Nadia, if anything Nadia's just said speaks to you, please do get in touch with her. Go to her website. The details are in the show notes. If you haven't read Nadia's new book, The Yoga Manifesto, How Yoga Helped Me and Why It Needs to Save Itself, please go and get yourself a copy. Again, you can Google and see where it's on sale, or you can go straight to Nadia's website. I'm really excited to meet you, Nadia, at an event in the future.
Yes, me too.
And we're so, so grateful that you came on the show. Honestly, thank you so much. You're an absolute G unit.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. You're both wonderful, and I love what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. You can connect to us and our guests via the links in each episode's show notes. Before you go, we invite you to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the goodness to come. And if you enjoyed today, perhaps tell a friend to tell a friend. We are always grateful for you, our listeners, for our fabulous guests, and to everyone who has contributed to and been a part of our journey here.
Our music is by Tomo Carter. Everything else is brought to you by us, the PowerUp Power Team.
I'm Mesma.
I am Amma Rouge. And we are PowerUp Podcast.